2 days afterwards, I said Miami shouldn't be in the college football playoff. I look back on videos from yesterday, and I'm embarrassed. I don't recognize that guy.
If you think Mike Ryan is an idiot for his takes on the college football playoff, you're the idiot.
Miami is a fraud. A fraud? Because they lost by 2 games by a combined 9 points, one to a ranked Syracuse team? No, a fraud goes to a 6-win SEC school and gets blown out 24-3.
Mike is acting in extremes to remove the scales from your eyes, to reveal the sheer absurdity of the college football playoff ranking.
You truly believe that they'd be in the playoff if they're in the SEC and they're not because they're in the ACC?
Yes, I would. And you know how? Texas A&M was a game away from being in the SEC championship game. Georgia is in the SEC championship game, and they stole a game from Georgia Tech at home. They were down 14 with 5 minutes left.
The SEC is one giant loss sandwich, with loss after loss folded into one another. Dig deep enough, and you won't believe what you'll find.
What more evidence do you need to have this year that the SEC isn't all that good with but it's parity. They're all beating each other up because it's so difficult. Louisville won by 40 at Kentucky.
Texas lost to Georgia. Georgia lost to Alabama. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt lost to the Georgia State Panthers, the second worst team in the Sun Belt Conference.
You know why they shouldn't be in the playoff over Miami? Because they lost one more f***ing game!
Don't let the outfit and appearance fool you. The scruffy, unshaven, unkempt look, the robe, the sweater, the fact that I'm recording in a closet, don't let it fool you. I know ball. And this is Nasty Nate of the Dan Le Batard Show, the fastest growing Dan Le Batard Show fan YouTube channel. And we're talking college football playoff. The college football playoff is broken. And it took me this most recent ranking to finally realize it and say it. And so what's broken about it? Is it that there's not enough teams? No. That is not what's broken about it. Honestly, going up into this week, I was like, dang, the 12-team playoff has been awesome. Total banger. What a great season. Like, you know, all the fears and concerns in terms of like, not as many games are going to matter as much. The truth is, overall, more games matter in college football. I think it's elevated college football and made it a sport that I already think is more entertaining and fun than the NFL. And because there's just so many more games, like you get way more entertaining games, but there's so many games that, you know, they were great games, but in the grand scheme of things, they didn't really mean anything because, you know, that team's playoff setting or playoff seeding was already set and their playoff fate was already set. They were never going to make it. It just ended up being, wow, what a great game. Do you remember that? But this season, so many of the great games also have playoff importance, except now with this most recent ranking, you're realizing maybe not so much because the playoff committee is going to do anything it can to get Alabama in the playoff, whether or not they deserve it or not. And here's where the college football playoff is broken. It's actually not broken because they put Alabama in over Miami. It's not broken because of what some would say is a perceived SEC bias. Here's why the college football playoff is broken. They're outthinking themselves. Like, they always have to come up with another explanation on top of their rankings, because the simplest way to rank them, simply wins and losses, is not done, right? Miami has 2 losses. They're 10-2. Alabama 9-3, and yet Alabama's in over them. So you need an explanation, because guess what? In any other sport, the 10-2 team is getting in. Okay? In any other sport, the team with more wins gets in ahead of the team with less wins. It's only in college where we see things like this, even in March Madness, but people, it's a little bit less because there's 60. Is that what college football needs to do, go to 60? No, they don't. And is there always going to be somebody that feels left out? Sure. And in the NFL, are there some seasons where like, man, bummer that team didn't make the playoff, but nobody feels outraged or so, because why? How you get into the playoffs in the NFL is the same every single year, but not in college football. It's not the same every single year. Just ask Florida State last year. Power 5 conference, win all your games, win your championship game. Guess what? You don't get in. We're going to put Alabama in instead. And now this year, Miami, 2 losses, which, yeah, not great. 2 losses out of their last 3 games. Bad timing. But those teams are not, like, 2 losses by a combined 9 points. 2 teams that are not. They're not bad teams. Alabama has lost to bad teams. Oklahoma is not good, and Oklahoma whooped them. Like, 24-3. That was embarrassing. And guess what, folks? Vanderbilt's not good either. But people don't talk about it because guess what? We love Diego Pavia. He's fun. He's a lot of fun. He's a funny, exciting, fun, electric part of the college football playoff. So we don't talk negatively about Vanderbilt because it has the vibes around Vanderbilt are amazing. But that is not a good football team, because you know what good football teams don't do? They don't lose to the Georgia State Panthers, the 3-9 Georgia State Panthers, the second worst team in the Sun Belt Conference. They're not a good team, but we don't talk about it because usually Vandy sucks and the vibes around Vandy are awesome, and we don't want to detract and take away from it. But the fact of the matter is Vanderbilt is not a good team, and they beat Alabama by 5 points, okay? And then Alabama has their other loss as well, which another close loss, okay? 3 losses. One of them is a way worse than Miami. And you're telling me that is not a disqualifying loss? Miami lost to a ranked opponent, Syracuse, by 4 points, 38-42. I can do math. And they're out and Alabama's in. And here's the thing. I could give you a situation where Miami still has this same record, and you would say, you know what? It's more likely that they're in. And here's what you do. Swap Miami's first game of the season with their last game of the season, and you tell me if the playoff committee doesn't put them in, right? Put their Florida win at the end of their season, put the Syracuse loss at the beginning of their season. Close loss. They run the table, suffer to Georgia Tech. They might have a better chance of getting in. Maybe you could argue that Miami never climbs the ranks as high with that initial Syracuse loss and then a Georgia Tech loss. knocks them way out of the playoff rankings, and that a impressive Florida win at the end of the season would not be enough to catapult them. So I guess you could argue it there, but I think if you flip around some of the losses in Miami's schedule, they might be in over Alabama, and you would be more okay with it. Just stop and think about that statement. It's ridiculous, right? It is ridiculous that we're letting the timing of wins, right? No other sport does that. Where guess what? Like, in professional sports, if you start 8-0 and then finish the rest of the season 3-6, and that's a good enough record to get into the playoffs, you're still getting into the playoffs. It doesn't matter when you get your wins there. It's absurd. So the college football, and where does this all come from? I think it comes from the fact that for so long we had the BCS, a computer system, which honestly, if you go back and think about it, the BCS was a computer system that was a algorithm that computed everything and in a way was a consistent model. It just, 2 teams was not enough to get a playoff sample. There's too many teams that are deserving of a shot, and the BCS didn't give enough teams a shot at a title. But because we had this BCS thing that was kind of ambiguous in a sense in terms of like, ooh, what are the computers going to decide? Now, when we get a bunch of people together, we think they have to do this extra layer of thinking. And I think the college football playoff needs to go and keep things simple. Like, keep it consistent, keep it simple. That's what you need to do. I don't want all these big explanations where, honestly, they're arbitrary, right? They sit there and they say Alabama is in because they are 3-1 against above 500 teams. But if you change that to 500 or above, suddenly that record doesn't look as impressive, right? And they're 3-1 against ranked teams, and Miami, I think, is 0-1. However, if you make it, instead of top 25 teams, you make it top 30 teams, Miami's 3-1 against top 30 teams. Like, what's the difference between a top 25 and a top 30? Not much of a difference. Arbitrary, some would say. And that's my take on the college football playoff. They gotta simplify it, because guess what? If it's simple and I can understand it and it's consistent, I'm not gonna complain about it. But when you make it convoluted, arbitrary, and you change it from year to year, there's something to be upset about. But does conspiracy, you know what?
Put this town on alert.
Got to put you on alert to this here. And
This thing is going to blow.
this might blow up in their faces, but does the NCAA even want to change this, or do they want the conspiracy? Or sorry, I had a brain fart there, you guys. I'm going to be honest. Does the NCAA even want to change this, or do they want to keep it because they want people talking? I think they want people talking. I think they like the fact that there's this mystery behind it, and it's not going to be consistent, or there's going to be this added layer of BS, because guess what? You stow controversy, people are going to talk about it, you create engagement, and man, that's a little bit of BS too, man.
Put this town on alert.
That doesn't sit well with me either, but I think, will the NCAA change it? No. I guess, like, so what's the solution then? If the NCAA isn't going to take my suggestion of make it simple, and they're probably not going to listen to any of Billy Gill's flip sides or swap week, even though swap week would be totally badass. Already covered that. Swap week, check that out on a prior episode. What's there to do? I think the only answer is you expand it to a 16-team playoff. And then at that point, though, you think about this year, like, you go to 16, like, then there's a lot more teams that are feeling left out at 16, right? Like, oh man, if it was a 16 team playoff with what it is like this year, just imagining like all the different things that are happening. Like, so if you look at this year with a 16 team playoff, that Arizona State, South Carolina, Mississippi teams on the fringe, Tulane, Iowa State, BYU, although BYU, they're out of there. Oh, wait, what? How come this isn't giving me the most recent rankings? That's old. What, 2024? Give me that. There we go. Now we're talking, although, okay, Arizona State 15, Iowa State 16, and those are the two playing in the Big 12. Like, Miami's in. Clemson could get in and kick somebody out at 17. BYU, they're most likely looking out. But again, you'd understand. I mean, I wouldn't complain that much about if I'm BYU getting out. You lost to a below 500 Kansas team, which, yeah, they did go on a serious hot streak and play more up to what people thought Kansas was going to be this year. But I think 16 is, if you're a fan and you're feeling a little frustrated with the playoff, I think the only hope is a 16 team playoff. And then they'll stop there. You cannot go past 16. And maybe they even just go to like 14, because that's what the NFL is at right now too. It just lessens it a little bit, because at the end of the day, you can't sit here and tell me somebody from the March Madness that got left out and be like, man, that team really had a shot at winning a title. But in terms of only a 12-team playoff, like, sure, say what you will about Miami, but this season has been wide open with an offense like that. Getting a bye no, they wouldn't get a bye. Sorry, they blew that chance, Miami. If you won and you got a bye, then okay. If you had a bye, Miami could have had a chance. Probably weren't going to win from coming in this way, but you still deserved a shot, right? People might talk about Miami for a little bit. People are definitely going to remember Florida State and being robbed of that undefeated season just because of the Jordan Travis injury. People still remember and talk about Auburn, UCF. Like, those are memorable things that we still remember. You expand it to 16, I don't think people are going to remember the teams that get snubbed anymore, right? So there's your solution. And now we got to move on. I've been talking too much. I went hard on the sports. This is the fan Le Batard Show. We got to talk Le Batard Show, ladies and gentlemen. And where am I going to start is, it's been a minute since I've done this. There's a lot of things I wanted to do. Things I wanted to do was find that Jason Kelsey video and time myself censoring it to see if I could censor the video and beat the video team in the time it took them to get that video to Dan. I'm not going to do that. That would have been a fun little thing to see what I could do. Maybe wouldn't have been the best podcast experience as I'm trying to multitask and do two things and get caught up in the air. But that was an opportunity that fell by the wayside. Another thing that fell by the wayside, but we can still talk about, Billy Gill's flip side. This has got to be expanded on. I was going to come up and try and think about all these different like takes to give, and then give like a but on the flip side kind of thing, and do what Billy did and think of some humorous things to do a flip side on. But I just didn't have the time to think of all these ideas and think of humorous flip side things. But what I can talk about is, man, Billy Gill heater. What a great couple of weeks it's been for Billy Gill. Not that like anything else has been lacking. But you got the swap week idea, flip side. Like, he's been really hilarious in the time that he's been on the show. So shout out to Billy Gill. You've definitely been doing a great job on the show. Another shout out, Mike Ryan. Look, big Mike Ryan fan. And again, here's why I like Mike Ryan, because I never know what I'm going to get from him. And I feel like out of the people on the show, he thinks the most about what he says on the show and how he can say things to engage the audience. So whenever something's happening, Mike is one of the people I want to hear about because Mike, I like Mike's opinions on things, but I also think Mike says and does things that aren't his opinion, but are bits, and does things to like point things out and are caricatures of, common things that we see in sports. So I love how Mike has handled this Miami loss. I thought it's been really good. Like, he had the day of Miami shouldn't be in the playoff, and I was kind of like, I made a own video too where I was like, yeah, I don't think they're gonna get in, and I was kind of like okay with it. And then he goes on his flip side, I'm like, you know what, dang it, Alabama's in, this is BS. And I got mad too, which is why I just talked like so much about it at the start of the show, probably way too much, but I thought it was really great how he did it. He really committed to it. And I mean, again, if you watch on the YouTube, I think it's obviously some aspect of a bit of it, because as he's saying things and getting animated, like, he has a smile on his face. Like, he was cracking me up with what he was doing. But at the same time, like, I'm laughing, but honestly, I think there's truth to it. Like, he says, like, Syracuse is just as good. And you may say that's ridiculous, but honestly, can you like, what you got? All of this is so much soaked in bias. This season has been so wide open, and everybody says the SEC is so good. But again, if you look head to head, they're not dominating head to head. And they've really, over the past couple of years, when it gets to bowl games, everyone's like, wow, SEC, like, they actually didn't do that great in their bowl games. That feels like a common thing that I see in bowls and other stuff, and other head-to-head matchups. So everybody talks about the SEC being so great, but when it comes to them actually going out of the conference, it has not been an impressive head and shoulders above domination, and yet everyone sees this as like, whoa, it's such a good conference. But again, as stated at the start of this show, Texas lost to Georgia, Georgia lost to Bama, Bama lost to Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt lost to Georgia Southern. Now, of course, you could do some sort of loss thing like that and add Miami into it, right? Miami lost to Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech lost to Georgia, who lost to, right? And eventually you wind yourself ending up back to the Georgia State Panthers. So crown them, Georgia State Panthers, your NCAA champions. Put them in the playoff, ladies and gentlemen. Go Panthers. This is the best 3-9 team we have ever seen. They have a win that translates all the way to the top of the NCAA, ladies and gentlemen, except for Oregon. Nobody's beaten Oregon, and if Oregon runs the table, then I guess at the end of the day, all that complaining and moaning, I said, if Oregon wins it and stays undefeated all season, guess what? Stand up, take a bow, college football. You did it again. You provided a champion that nobody can argue about. And at the end of the day, I guess all this ire that I'm feeling about Miami being left out and Alabama once again unjustly being put in is going to fade a little bit if Oregon does all that. But it'll fade, but I won't forget. So anyway, shout out Mike Ryan. I thought really hilarious. And the post-game show where he mentioned like Mario Cristobal is making, like, again, hilarious. Like, and overall, the show I thought has been fabulous. So many weeks. The show before Thanksgiving was Stu Gott's book. Stu was on such a heater of cracking me up, talking about his book. And you may hear something a little bit soon about the Dan Le Batard show and Stu Gott's personal record book. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. You're going to want to keep your eyes open for that, because there could be something in it for you, right? Any other things that are left by the wayside? Something else I wanted to mention, there was a day on the show, I think it was the same day, the day before they went into Thanksgiving, they had the siren going off for Jeremy, and that cracked me up so much, because there's so many people that they would mention and they would just play the siren and look at Jeremy like, Jeremy, I know. Like, I really wish they kept that going like a little bit and would use that as a thing, because I love Jeremy, and I think the show always has to have people that and here's the thing, I don't disagree with Jeremy's opinions. I like Jeremy's opinions, but there's a lot of people that are like, oh, this Jeremy guy is so annoying. But I think having something like that balances out Jeremy for those people because it's funny, right? And those people are going to like and say, man, that's so funny. And you could, like, Jeremy's like looking disappointed, but he's in on the bit too, starting to laugh and smile. That was another great bit by the Le Batard Show. Like, the Le Batard Show has been so good recently. Like, man, just good vibes, puts a smile on my face, man. I don't know, comment if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube watching us, comment what about the Le Batard Show has been awesome for you over these last couple weeks. So, anything, as I don't mind that's me dropping my phone trying to look at notes that I take for things to talk about. Here's something, here's a little bit of a pushback. David Samson, nothing personal. I think it was today, on this week, he talked about the assassination of, I think it's the United Healthcare CEO. Terrible thing. And I agree with all the points he's bringing up of it's awful that some people respond to this with celebration or you deserve it. And him pointing out, like, that assassination is not any way to bring about change. There was just a moment where I felt like he either got caught up in the air or thought that this would land better, but I thought he said something that did not come off well for him and showed, honestly, some really big blind spots when it comes to the problem of healthcare in this country and the issues that people have with healthcare, right? Because that's what this all stems to, and people responding that way who are responding inappropriately. I agree with you 100%. But they're responding to what they perceive are injustices within the healthcare system. And at one point, David Samson said, if you're out there and you think, oh, like, you didn't get a fair shake in this life and you just had more money, like, you'd be more happier. Like, first off, you're lying. And if you think that's me, then why is my sister dead? Why did my dad die early? And I thought he was saying that to maybe, like, wake up people and, like, shock them into, like, hey, I've suffered loss too. But here's the problem with that. People's problem with healthcare in the United States is not that people die. We all understand that, guess what? Your health, like, there's a lot of things that are under your control, but you can do all the right things and you can get cancer, you can get a disease, and you can die. That's a part of life. But you know what a lot of people think shouldn't be is having to decide whether you're going to pay for your groceries or pay for, like, life-saving medicine, right? We live in a country that says everyone deserves the right to life, happiness, and something else. Sorry, haven't read my Constitution in a while, but you get the gist, right? And so some people feel it's unfair that we have a healthcare system that for a lot of Americans, they go through life getting a disease that perhaps some of it is due to poor living choices, but for many, perhaps it is out of their control. And, maybe they're going through kidney failure and they cannot afford dialysis or the proper medication, and they're having to decide, or they end up dying because they can't afford it. That's unjust, David. Like, again, sorry for your loss, but the issue is not that people are dying from diseases. It's people dying from things where we could find a way to pay for it. And, maybe we don't have as much feeling for that because that sounds like a logistics issue there, but that's a logistics issue that maybe our smartest people who really understand logistics could do a better job figuring out how to get that paid so many people don't have to decide, am I going to buy groceries, or am I going to buy my tickets to take the bus, or am I going to buy my medicine that's going to save my life? maybe we could figure out or do a better job handling that logistics, right? So I thought, I understand his heart and where he's coming from. Just don't think he realizes that came off to me a little tone deaf and ignorant. And I guess I wanted to touch on that because we live in a country where there's 2 million personal bankruptcies, and guess what? 62% of those are from medical debt. Maybe there's a problem with that. I don't know. I can hear a lot of people saying, oh, personal choices. A lot of people have medical debt because they don't have good personal choices, but there's a lot wound up in that. And I'm not going to take the time to unpack it. Okay. That's another podcast, folks. And it's late over here. I got a lot of other stuff to do, and I got to find my phone to remember what. Nope. I got it. I remember it. I don't need to bend down and look at it. Although I didn't have the time to research this. That was Le Batard Show's doing a toy drive. And I'm thinking, like, what toy would you bring to Dan to get, like, the best possible take out of him? I thought there was something there. And you know what? Honestly, off the top of my head, maybe if there was other people on the show, I could bounce ideas off of them real quick and come up with what's a good toy that you could bring Dan Le Batard to get like the best take out of him, or what toy would you give him where Dan would feel like compelled to spend a lot of time. Like, here's a ride-on car. That's expensive, right? That's an expensive toy. But you bring a huge ride-on car, little look at me Louie right there, for starters. Everyone's going to be like, look at that, what he's donating. Everybody knows, ka-ching, you put in a little bit of money. You bring a ride-on car to Dan Le Batard, which is a toy. Probably not the kind of toy they're looking for. But I bet Dan's going to feel compelled to not just give you a take, but probably talk to you for a couple of minutes. So, hey, if you want a little bit of extra time with Dan Le Batard, Nasty Nate of the Fan Le Batard Show suggests you bring a ride-on car to the toy drive. Could that cause some logistical problems for the show, traveling, all that? But we don't worry about that. We want to give and give well. Well, folks, I think I'm tapped out because I got to go record something for God Bless Highlight, and I don't want to stay up too late. Hey, psych, I'm back again because guess what? Forgot. Trying to do a couple new things consistently. One of them is review things. So last time I reviewed Deadpool 3. This time, guess what? We're reviewing an audiobook, folks. That's right. Been hitting the library up hard. And one of the things, find out when you join a library, they got a lot of apps where you get a lot of stuff too. And through an app, I got myself finally The Wager, which Fan Le Batard Show fans, you might remember the author David Grann coming on the Le Batard Show and having his segment with them where they just kept saying semen to them. Because guess what? If you listen to the book, you find out why. If all Dan did, or somebody who did, was read the first couple chapters, they sure use the word semen a lot in the first couple chapters, so you could understand it. So, what is Nasty Nate's take on The Wager? I enjoyed it, folks. Let me take you on my journey here. So it's really an interesting story. It's one of those where, like, you read the back of the book and the description of it, you're hooked. You're like, dude, that sounds awesome. True story, historical. It's a nonfiction, and the story of The Wager, where a ship is shipwrecked, and so many months or years later, like 30 or 40 seamen wash up on the coast of South America, I think Brazil, and they say, we survived from The Wager. And then a couple months or years later, listen to this book fast, a little foggy on the timeline, but a smaller crew and raft show up, and they say, those people that left, they're not survivors, they're mutineers, and they abandon us, and now they're going to go to a court-martial trial where, guess what? If it is in fact a court-martial, something that could happen for mutiny is being hung. So, who's telling the truth? That's what's set up. And, seems really intriguing. One downside of it is he goes through the story and it's actually, to me, a pretty straightforward story of what happened. And in the end, there's a little bit, I'd say, I don't want to spoil it, so I'll just say like a little bit of a letdown in terms of like it's the cover of the book, reading the back of it, it's like, oh man, this court case, it sounds like so sensational. And when you get to the court case part of it, that's actually a little blah. That being said, it's still an amazing book where like hearing this story is incredible. Like the amount of detail and like stuff that this guy goes over and uncovers by reading the journals that people wrote, even the fact that like you were able to know so much of what happened so long ago is really incredible and fascinating. It's a fascinating story of survival. And I think even though the climax that it builds up to of the court case is a little blah, he actually keeps adding these other surprising things at the end to where the book actually, to me, builds up to like a really powerful ending and message on empire and how empires tell stories too, right? The men that survived the wager told their story of survival, and these men were a part of the British Empire. And likewise, empires through their people tell the stories of their empire, who is worthy of ruling and who should be ruled, whose stories are worth telling and whose stories are hidden and not told and lost. And so in the end, he builds up to, like, for me, a really powerful ending to the book that actually it comes a little bit, you see it comes a little bit out of nowhere, but I really enjoyed The Wager. So what's the score I'm going to give it? I thought, hey, you guys know I'm a fast listener, so let's rate audiobooks on a scale of how fast would I listen to it, with a lower score being better. So we got 1.0, the holy grail of listening speeds for an amazing book. Savor it, to a 4.0, power through, get through it. Now, obviously, the fastest I could listen to this book was 3.0. It wasn't on the app. That goes up to 4.0. That being said, my score is actually not the actual speed that I listen to, because guess what? I'm listening to that thing above 2.0, most likely no matter what. I mean, it's an audiobook. One guy's talking. Who are we kidding? There's times where I'm listening to that thing at 3.0 as fast as I can go. Although, for this one, irrelevant. Here is my score. I'm going to give it a 1.5 times speed. That's high praise. Did I actually listen to it at that speed? No. But that, according to my rating scale, it is a 1.5 times speed. And what's this, folks? We've got one other thing, and now this is starting to become a real long episode. I purchased the Dan Le Batard Show Coloring book, ladies and gentlemen, and flipped through it. Gotta say, enjoy the pictures that are there. Ordered it just a little bit for Thanksgiving. Took a little bit of time to get to me, probably because of the Thanksgiving holiday, although I did kind of lag. Maybe this was sitting in my mailbox for a day or two because I didn't get to the mail in time. But did you need to know that? Is that really fascinating podcast stuff? Probably not, but this is what happens when you podcast alone. You ramble. Anyway, got it. Excited about this. I enjoy flipping through it, seeing it. What are some of my top coloring pages that I am most excited to color? Here's one where I got excited. The Greg Cote Hee Haw 3 band. I was there in Vegas, so that's going to be a fun one to color. And I got this because not because I'm actually into coloring. I got it because I thought, again, it's 20 years. I wanted to kind of buy some things to celebrate the fact that the Le Batard Show, this thing that, again, every day, listen to it. And my scale for is it a good show is, does it make me smile? And every single day I listen to the show and they do something that makes me smile, makes me better enjoy my day. And that's why I love the Le Batard Show. So I wanted to buy some things to commemorate how long they've been doing that. And got this also because I was like, it'd be cool. Fine, because there's some iconic moments in here. Billy biting an onion. You've got corporate Mike. So why not go back, find those things, play them, and then pause them at a certain time, keep playing the audio, and do a time lapse of me, or maybe my wife, who's much better at coloring this book and turn it into a reel, which guess what? The Le Batard Show is going to repost that hashtag, and then I'm going to do that in hashtag grow the show. So a little strategy on Nasty Nate's part, but got it. I'm excited for the book. I enjoy the pictures that are in it. Got Pablo as the killer whale. That would make for a good Instagram reel. And again, guess what? Can definitely do that because of the oral history in which they played the segment where Jesse Ventura went on that long talk, and you got to hear a lot more of the background on that. So oral history, little tidbit there on the end, is continued to be good and enjoyable listen. Although I will say the last 2 episodes I don't feel have been like as good as the first 4. And I think that's just because I'm a little bit fuzzy in the timeline. Like before it felt like when they first started it, they were very clear on the timeline, and I was clear on the things they were building to. And the last 2 episodes, like, I don't know, like how much time has actually moved, like where are we? And then I was surprised in episode 6 to still hear sound of them talking about LeBron. Was it? I thought they did. You know what? Maybe I'm wrong because they did have a lot of sound. No, they had Dan rants in this one. And I'm like, I thought we were past that in the timeline here. Like that, the last episode had covered all of that. But I guess like he was in Miami for 4 years. So it just feels like the one thing, it's still been great, enjoyable. What I feel like these last couple episodes of the oral history has been missing to make it phenomenal, which the first 4 I felt were phenomenal, is I felt like there were concrete things in the timeline and specific moments and revelations that the show built up to that I was like, wow, that's really fascinating to learn. It was fascinating to learn about the founding of the radio station and even just details about the purchasing of that and what that was. Like those were specific nitty-gritty things. And as they've moved on from that, like there's still been interesting things to learn, but it feels like it's been a little bit vaguer. Like Mike's had some things that he's said about like, oh, it was hard losing my cool. And, it's up to him to reveal that. But I feel like for me, a specific instance would be good of that. And so here's another example of that. The show talked about like, there were tensions and they were feeling scared of Dan, and they mentioned the therapy. Think of how, Dan, the therapist, asked him something going on in your life, and it felt like, Dan, you needed to hear that. Dan didn't really give any credence to that of like, yeah, you know what, you were right. That did help me realize some things. At least I don't think he did. Maybe I forgot. It's been a minute. But I felt like Dan didn't really acknowledge that as whether or not like, oh, like I agree with you. That did help me realize some things, and then we were better. Like a lot of times they talk about this and Dan's like, I don't feel I was doing that. So it's interesting. I think a lot of the things you're seeing is Dan behaving in a manner and people getting a read from him, and Dan not realizing how his behavior is affecting other people. And so you play that. It would have been great to actually hear that in the clip of hearing the therapist talk about. So I did just a little light research to try to find it. Didn't come up with anything. Probably going to do something there because maybe that's something I want to investigate and dig in deeper and hear those actual discussions of Dan and Stu with a therapist. Because oh man, like my whole timeline with the show is a little bit blurry because I just started listening to them when they joined ESPN Radio. And again, my sports listening journey was, I listened to music and then going to college, got my own car, got total control of when I'm in my car, what I'm listening to, still listen to music. But then about sophomore for, second year, whatever you want to call it, of college, started listening to sports radio. And so I would just catch, I knew the times of certain shows, and eventually the Le Batard Show moved into a time slot. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And like, I think I've shared this in the past. I was like, oh no, where'd Doug Gottlieb go? I think they replaced Doug Gottlieb at first. And I was like, oh man, bummer. ESPN shifted around their stuff. I don't get to hear Doug Gottlieb talk anymore. And then eventually they bounced out Colin Cowherd, who, yes, I would listen to Colin Cowherd in the morning drive around, would enjoy his takes. But all these people, as they've come and gone and left ESPN, I left them too. Le Batard Show is the only one. Like, once I heard it, I'm like, I stopped listening to sports radio talk in the car. And I just listened to ESPN radio. I just listened to the Le Batard Show, because once you get hooked on that, like, there's so much within there that they do and produce. Like, I don't need to hear standard sports talk radio. And that, folks, is the real end. Thank you, Le Batard Show, for being so great and producing some amazing shows. Let's continue to exceed and do well. Nasty Nate loves the Le Batard Show, and I'm sure all the fans here are fans who also love the show as well. Let's end it.